For 7 years, the Syrian civil war has raged on. Many thousands have been killed. Millions have fled the war-ravaged country, resulting in political upheaval around the globe, including in the United States. The UN has attempted ceasefire resolutions. The U.S. bombed a Syrian military installation last year after accusing the Assad government of gassing rebel strongholds. Russia continues to be the greatest ally of the Syrian government. This week saw what's being called the deadliest day in the ongoing war after rebels and civilians in the city of eastern Ghouta were bombed. So where does the United States fit into this long-running war, and has the Trump administration shown any answers or will to help bring an end to the carnage? Let's talk about that with Alon Sachar, Middle East expert, co-author of A Path to Peace, A Brief History of Israeli-Palestinian Negotiations and a Way Forward in the Middle East. He co-authored it with George Mitchell, the former U.S. Special Envoy for Middle East Peace. He is in San Francisco. And Joel Rubin, who served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs in the Obama administration, he's president of the Washington Strategy Group. Joel joins us from Washington. Okay, Alon, we'll start with you. We've seen the deadliest day. Who's in violation of the ceasefire?
Well, when the UN Security Council declared a ceasefire about 10 days ago, the hope was that that could lead to a period of calm for a little while. And as has happened so many times in the past, the Assad regime continues to bombard civilian positions throughout Syria, with the help of Russia in particular, and in its attempt to exert more control over the Syrian territory. As it stands now, President Bashar al-Assad is in the strongest position he has been in really since the start of the civil war. Support from Russia, the help of the Iranians have really helped prop up the Assad regime in a way that allows him to feel confident in his ability to remain in power in the future.
All right, the rebels hold Ghouta. What happens if that falls, Joel?
Well, Larry, if it falls, certainly it will be tragic. And right now we're witnessing a very defensive crouch on American policy in Syria. We essentially are supporting the Syrian Kurdish minority military apparatus to protect an enclave and protecting them from Iranian intervention, Russian intervention, and whatnot. But there's really no policy here. So as enclaves may fall, it's not clear what the next way forward is. And the failure of the administration to gather significant diplomatic leverage and pool the warring parties together, and that includes engaging Iran and Russia, the failure to do that is essentially leaving us in this continuous cycle of Syrian government forces running over enclaves, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but not really seeing an end to this tragic conflict.
Alon, it seems like a great moral issue. Is the United States, what are we doing?
It absolutely is a moral issue. As you said in the opening, there have been hundreds of thousands of Syrian deaths throughout the civil war, millions upon millions of displaced people. It's really, as it's been described, as hell on earth in Syria right now. The real question is, what can the U.S. do? And that is something that the Trump administration obviously is struggling with, but so did the Obama administration. It is just unclear what kind of policy we could put forward that will allow for there to be some peaceful resolution at this time. As Joel said, what we could be doing is pushing more forcefully for a diplomatic resolution, but also making it very clear to Assad and to the Russians that there are limits. The Trump administration has done this in the past. It's bombed facilities. Most recently, it bombed a convoy that included Russian contractors that really set a different tone between the Trump administration and the Obama administration. But it's not clear whether they're willing to continue to follow through with these kinds of actions going forward. There have been recent reports of new chemical attacks in Syria, chlorine attacks, and so far the U.S. hasn't really done anything. And so what we really need is a clear strategy and a way to push forward.
Joel, why is Putin so supportive of Assad?
Well, this goes back really, Larry, for decades. Russia and earlier the Soviet Union was and is a patron of Syria. Syria has always been, in a sense, a beachhead for Russia in the Middle East. The Russians have a seaport there, and Russia is loath to give it up. That's why Putin came in very heavy a couple of years ago to militarily support Assad when Assad was in a very weak position, and essentially took control of the skies. And it's unlikely that that's going to change. And that really opens up a larger strategic question for the United States, which is that now with Russia essentially controlling the Assad regime in partnership with Iran, there is going to be what looks to be a permanent beachhead in the heart of the Middle East for Russia. And Israel, as we see, is beginning to engage militarily in Syria. That won't lead to anywhere good. We're going to have to recognize reality as it is and deal directly with Russia. First, to cauterize, in a sense, this horrible, tragic humanitarian catastrophe, as Alon mentioned, and really stop the killing, and then move back into a different position. But it does look like Russia is there to stay.
When Obama did nothing after he drew that line in the sand, was that a big mistake, Alon?
I think it was a mistake. You could argue whether it was the right thing to draw the red line or whether we should have acted after that red line was drawn. But the reality is that President Assad used chemical weapons after we had been very clear that there would be consequences, and there were no consequences for that. The problem is, if you get involved in that kind of way, how do we extract ourselves from that? It could be an endless war in Syria, and it's something that the American people don't seem to have an appetite for right now. So these are incredibly tough decisions. And on top of that, right now, as Joel was saying, you have Iranian and Russian influence throughout Syria, and the potential for a U.S. conflict directly with those countries is increased exponentially. So it's very, very challenging.
Joel, Bloomberg's editorial board recently said it's time for another red line in Syria, one that the United States will not back away from. Is that a good idea?
Well, red lines tend to be tripwires for further conflict. I think that it's crucial that we keep our military options close to the vest. And as Alon mentioned, there was a recent kinetic activity in theater. That was a tactical response by the U.S. military to an incursion, a potential incursion in territory. And that was an appropriate response. And it pushed away the opponents. But we have to be careful about not boxing ourselves in. Once we draw red lines, we're then committed, and it may really not be the best policy. They don't always work, and clearly the red line, and President Obama, there was a bit of hubris in the White House that by laying a red line, somehow that would have prevented Assad from using chemical weapons. I don't think they calculated that he would cross that threshold so boldly, but he did. And President Obama blinked, and the Congress blinked as well. And we are now in a harder position today. So we need to be very careful about red lines. But what we should be doing is making sure that our allies and the regional adversaries understand that we're committed to ending this conflict and really engaging with all of the key players.
Alon and Joel, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll be calling on you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.